Well, the first 262 I saw was flying vertically up, firing at a B-17 straight up, and I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it.
They knocked down 3 planes.
8 missions you were lucky, 10 somebody up there like you, 25 was almost an impossibility.
The plane blew up and I got knocked out.
Welcome to Air Combat Journal. Today's journal entry features World War II B-17 command pilot James K. McLaughlin, who led 39 bomber missions throughout Europe in World War II. This is part 1 of his 2-part interview. If you want to know what it was like leading the entire 8th Air Force bomb wing into combat and flying on the infamous Schweinfurt mission, this story is for you. This is your pilot, John Sermon, asking you to strap in and sit back. Air Combat Journal is ready for takeoff.
Well, the first 262 I saw was flying vertically up, firing at a B-17 straight up, and I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. And of course, I didn't see many of them. I only saw them, a half a dozen times. And this is the only time I saw one firing at a B-17. But I knew they were there. I'd also seen our P-59. We had a squadron of P-59s over on the southeast coast of England. But our airplanes, like their airplanes, could only stay in the air about 20 minutes. They just didn't have any range at all. And so the war was so far along that I was certain we were going to win the war. And I really wasn't that much worried about them. Now, had this occurred a year earlier, then I very well could have been a different story, because the German production of airplanes was greater at the end of the war than it was in the beginning of the war. They were producing, Albert Speer apparently was a magician when it came to manufacturing, because they were turning airplanes out right and left. It was pilots that hurt them, and lack of pilots. And but had they got the German jet going a year earlier, we very well would not have been able to have wiped out the Luftwaffe before the invasion. And I feel very certain that if the Luftwaffe could have been effective in the invasion, it would have made the invasion a heck of a lot tougher, a whole lot tougher. In the first place, they would have sunk a bunch of ships out in the channel. And but we had the Luftwaffe practically wiped out of the air by the time that occurred.
Tell me about the Luftwaffe fighters' attack tactics.
Well, in the beginning, they attacked from any angle they could see us, coming down out of the sun, coming up behind us and shooting at us, attacking. And they soon found that we could throw so much firepower on them that they were not being as effective as they could be, and they soon switched to a head-on attack on us. They'd fly out in front of us, 3 miles, make a turn into us at our level, come down on our level in a turn toward us, and start firing right at our nose, coming right at us. They'd roll over on their back as they approached, still firing. And then as they got close, they'd pull the nose down and go shooting down toward the ground, away from us at maximum speed. That way they were shooting, they had the whole group of our airplanes in front of their sights. And it wasn't like as good a target as a broadside target, but their chance of survival was so much better. Because of the high rate of closure speed, they'd be coming, I'm sure, 300, 350 miles an hour or more, and we'd be going close to 200. So it was a pretty fast rate of closure of speed. And they were effective. They crippled a lot of airplanes doing that.
And didn't they have armor on their bellies, and that's the reason they rolled over to peel down?
No, they rolled over to peel down because they could get away so much faster. And when they rolled and went down, there were only 2 guns that could shoot at them. That was the ball turret.
Explain the Army Air Corps' response to the very effective and repeated frontal attacks.
When we first went over, we didn't have a gun in the nose that could shoot straight ahead. We had a 150 caliber, well, originally a 30 caliber only, but later a 50 caliber mounted in the side of the nose that the navigator could shoot, fire, or the bombardier, whichever one wanted to get up on it and start firing it. Nothing would shoot straight ahead. Immediately after we got over there, and this was back in the days when everybody thought you couldn't modify an airplane unless right field approved it. Well, hell, when you're getting killed, you can't wait for right field, so we modified them right there and mounted a 50 caliber right in the nose of the plexiglass nose of the airplane. And that gave us a single 50 caliber that would shoot dead ahead. And quickly, Boeing or somebody came up with a turret, a chin turret on the front with two 50s. And should have had four 50s. And that just increased the forward firepower, doubled it right off. And I'm sure it was a big improvement. I don't know what the statistics are. I don't even know whether anybody knows for sure what they are. But it increased our firepower tremendously.
Was it intimidating to be the group leader and know that all the initial front attacks are being directed at you?
Well, you'd see them coming and they started to fire. When you see anything out in front of you coming toward you, every airplane thinks it's going to hit him. A couple of times I've seen propellers come off of 4 airplanes in a formation. And when it does, it goes winding out and it climbs up. And then it starts falling back toward you. And you're positive it's going to hit you, come right through your windshield. And it doesn't, it goes under you. But my point is that anything coming towards you looks like it's coming right through your windshield. So anybody that's looking at it feels sure they're going to hit it, you're going to get hit. And yes, it scares the hell out of you to see someone shooting at you. I mean, even if you are standing behind a tree and somebody's shooting at you, and you could get behind the tree, you're still scared. And we had no place to go. As I wrote in my book, the problem with flying combat is there's no place to hide. You're up in the air, you're the target, and that's it.
But as a lead target or a lead crew though, didn't you feel more at risk because they were coming after the lead?
Well, yes, you felt at risk, but the truth of the matter was I knew, and everybody else in the business knew, that the lead plane normally was the safest place to be in the formation, statistically speaking. Well, it wasn't. The high squadron lead was the safest place. But the group lead was a pretty safe place. I only know I know of 3 or 4 times when group leaders got shot down. Yeah, I can't think of his name, Colonel. I saw, personally saw one group leader get shot down over Leipzig. Just a direct hit. But the lead ship was not considered the most dangerous place. Kids in the back end were in the most dangerous place.
Why was the back end of the formation the most dangerous place?
Well, because when the flak was shooting at you, more flak went through the back of the formation than it did through the front of the formation. And therefore, if you were back there, you're more apt to get hit. Anything that happened in front of you, it was likely to hit you. If an airplane blew up, for instance, in front of you, close to you, you're likely to catch a lot of it. It doesn't take much on a prop, for instance, to knock a prop out. A piece of metal going through it can cause it to vibrate heavily, and you have to pull the power back on it, and so on and so forth. It was just, statistics just showed that the back end of the formation was the most dangerous place. I think some of it was due to the fact that the kids lagged back sometimes. They didn't stay up in close formation, and the fighters would pick them off from the back, from the rear. The 20 millimeter cannon had 300 or 400 yards more range than a 50 caliber. So the fighter could sit back at a certain point and effectively shoot at you, and you couldn't effectively shoot at him. Now they didn't do much of that, but the truth is they could.
Did you ever have to abort any missions?
Yeah, I boarded one time.
Tell me about that and how you had to go before the board. And
well, it was my very first or second mission. I've forgotten which now, and I was new at the business. My first mission I flew as a first pilot. First mission I flew as a co-pilot to my squadron commander. Then 6 months later, I came back to combat. I'd been down in North Africa and flew my first mission, and the mechanic overfilled the oil tank on my number 3 engine. And while we were flying to form up, oil began to boil out of the engine and out on the wing and go back through the back of the airplane. And we kept doing everything we could to try to figure out what was going on. And finally we decided that it had to be an oil leak, and that sooner or later we were going to lose our oil pressure and have to fail that engine. And the smart thing to do was to get on the ground. So I landed at the nearest air base. Thank goodness the whole mission was scrubbed and everybody came back home, so I didn't get it counted as an abortion. But I learned right then that as soon as I got on the ground and found out what had happened, I felt like 2 cents. And I made sure from then on that I wasn't going to abort anymore.
So I had another lead pilot. He had a similar incident where they didn't put the cap back on one of the fuel tanks, and his fuel all siphoned off.
Yeah, it'll siphon right out.
And he was one of the most patriotic go-get-'em guys, and he said he felt like 2 cents because here he couldn't fly the mission, and people go, oh yeah, you aborted. What's wrong? Was it too tough a mission?
Yeah, right. You get that kind of reputation if you did that more than once. Well, fear, most abortions were from fear. I don't know what percentage were mechanical failures. Runaway props was one of the problems we always had with the B-17, particularly when you get up into thinner air. And we had not a lot, but some guys that would get clear over the channel at 20,000 feet or more and lose a prop and couldn't get it back under control, so they would come back. And of course, when you get down in heavy air a lot of times, the thing comes back under control. And you land, and you say, well, my prop ran away. Well, it's not running away now. Well, but it ran away. But most of those mechanical failure abortions were justified. You had no business going into Europe on 3 engines. Fellows did it and got by with it, but it wasn't the smart thing to do at all. But most of the abortions were fear. Guys would just get to them and shake them, and they turn around and come home. And I had this sorry job as a group operations officer of meeting the people who aborted and making a decision on what kind of penalty they had to serve. Now, in the early part of the war, first few missions we flew, people would come back from mission and say, hell, I can't do this. I'm scared to death. I just can't. I had one of my classmates after our first raid into France, Lille, France, in October of '42. We all got shot at. And as I was riding my bicycle back to my quarters, I met him coming back the other direction. And I spoke to him, and he didn't even answer me. He went down and turned his wings, just took his wings off and handed them to his commanding squadron commander and said, I can't do this. I just can't do it. And then they would assign him to other jobs of some kind and let him get by with it. But later in the war, they switched from that and said, you're going to do it one way or the other. You're either going to do it if you're a first pilot, we'll put you on as a co-pilot, or we'll put you on as a tail gunner. We had a squadron operations officer in my 326 squadron. I actually saw them carry him and put him in the airplane to take off because he was so scared he just was like this. And a lot of people, fear will do a lot of things to people. But I don't know what percentage we had. It wasn't high. Most people, the great success of the 8th Air Force was the leadership. We had tremendous leadership. As someone said it this morning, there never was a mission turned back because of enemy action. We were recalled from some missions, and yes, it's true that we had people who lost engines and had to turn around and come home, things of that kind, but we never had anybody turn around in the face of the enemy and run. And I have to laud the leadership of the 8th Air Force people, squadron commanders and the group commanders, and the people who led those missions. And not all the group commanders flew all the missions they should have flown. They were scared too. Usually they got replaced before long if they didn't. But I know my group commander just laid the law down. He said, boys, we're going to take myself, my deputy, the group operations officer, the 4 squadron commanders, and 1 or 2 others he selected. And we'll take turns leading the mission. When your turn comes up, you lead it. If it goes to Poland, that's one thing, or if it just goes over across the channel and back, it's the luck of the draw. And that's the way we ran it. And I always admired him because he flew his missions in turn just like everybody else. And but fear was the biggest factor in the whole thing.
Did you ever fly to Flak City?
Flak City was the Ruhr Valley.
Okay, well I heard
Cologne and all those cities up and down the Ruhrs where you really got, we'd go to miles away to fly around the Ruhr Valley if we weren't bombing it.
Well, describe Flak to me, what your experience was with Flak.
Well, Flak was just getting shot at. I mean, you could be flying along, you'd approach a target, and all of a sudden here would be an explosion right out here, and one here, and one there. And then sometimes if they happened real close to you, in front of you, instead of being black smoke, you'd see all red, because you were so close to the explosion that happened right in front of your eyes. And you'd get a jolt from the concussion on the airplane, and then you'd hear the shrapnel rattling down as it hit the airplane, coming back through the air, just like you do when you would kick ice off of the wings at night, and it would rattle on the airplane. You'd hear all this rattle down the sides of the airplane. And of course, flak was really the worst enemy we had. It wasn't fighters, it was flak. Because as I said before, if you got disabled, then you were just duck soup for the fighters. And flak could not only maybe disable your airplane, it could injure 2 or 3 of your crewmen. And so flak was really the worst enemy we had. And of course, and you always had to put up with it. I described it, 8th Air Force, as being like the charge of the 600 in Rudyard Kipling's story, because it was just like you just flew into Germany, got shot at all the way in and all the way out. Now, some of it was a lot lighter than other places. Our intelligence was pretty good. Most of our routes were planned away from flak, so we could stay away from it on the route in. And of course, when we hit the IP, from there on in, we were going to get flak all the way through the target and all the way back out. And then we'd try to follow a route back out that would take us away from it all the time. But when you had to go into the Ruhr Valley or any place close to it, then it was just solid. They'd have hundreds of guns around a target, and they're shooting so many rounds a minute at you. And even an 88 on a tank could knock you out of the air. The only time I really got a bad hit, personally, was the morning after the bulge, when we could fly. A tank hit me right through the seat.
Wow.
Didn't hurt me, but it hit me.
Yeah, tell me about the armor that you guys had. You mentioned your seat, the armor that the B-17 carried.
Well, we didn't have much armor, really. We wore flak suits. Some guys sat on them and put them around them too. And later in the war, we wore steel helmets over the top of everything else. But B-17 did have some armor, but not very much. P-47 is the one that had the armor. They had a big, thick armor plating that ran from above your head, down your back, under your seat, down the floor, and under your feet. And a big R-2800 radial engine in front of you. You had real protection flying it.
Yeah. One last thing. I've heard the stories, and I've read the stories about the Bloody 100th and how they got their nickname, the Bloody 100th. They were wiped out 3 times, and the rumor was, or the legend is, that a plane dropped its wheels to surrender, and some German fighters were escorting it, and they turned their guns on the fighters and shot them down. And
yeah,
the Germans, what is there? What is your spin on it?
I don't know the truth about that. I heard that same story over there, and I know they did get totally decimated 2 or 3 times. I recall I was only at the 100th once, and that was to go over and testify on behalf of a gunner who had flown with me earlier in the year, and he'd been sent over there as a gunnery instructor, and he got in some kind of trouble, and they were court-martialing him. And I went over to testify on his behalf. But I don't know why the Germans picked on them so, but they did. And they were apparently pretty effective, because they shot them up so badly that 2 or 3 times they were taken off operations. And why in the world the Air Force did not change their designation and change their base and not use the 100th anymore and make them just like anybody else, I don't know. I never understood that.
Just in closing, what was your best day as a B-17 commander?
What was my best day? Oh, I had some good days. You could fly a mission and hardly get, everybody else gets shot up and you hardly ever be even shot at. The first raid to Schweinfurt, one of my best days was the first time I went to Schweinfurt in August of 43. I led the high squadron. And everybody else was getting shot at, and our group flew over there and back but hardly touched. I think we did lose 1 airplane. But the high squadron, we had no problem at all. Of course, I guess my best day was when I flew my last mission.
I heard one guy tell a story about how the B-24 didn't have the altitude that the B-17 had. And the Germans, I guess the 88s could reach a certain altitude, and they couldn't hit any higher, and the B-17s could fly above it, and it wasn't until they got the 105s that they could reach the B-17s. Is there any truth to that?
No, that's not true. The lower you were, the more accurate the German flak was. And there are 2 things that affected the B-24. They couldn't fly as high. They flew most of their missions at anywhere from 18 to 22,000. And they had a real high wing loading airplane. It didn't have the heavy structure that a B-17 had. It wouldn't take the punishment. It was much easier to blow a wing off a B-24. The advantage the B-17 had, it could take a lot of shooting up. You could keep as many as 2 engines running. You could fly the airplane almost with 1,000 holes through it. The second thing was the fact that it could get up to altitude. As a matter of fact, one of the tactics, particularly in the latter part of the war, that was taught, that if you got lost from your group for some reason and couldn't identify them or didn't know where you were or didn't know what to do, and you had 4 engines operating, climb to 34 or 5,000 feet. Of course, the German fighters couldn't get up there to you. And you could go home and be perfectly safe, or you could pick out a target and drop your bombs. And that's very true. One of the reasons the P-47 was so successful as a fighter, P-47 had the same supercharger system we had. You could take the damn thing to 40,000 feet. If you had a pressurized suit, you could have gone higher than that. But they'd get up at, P-47 would get up there at 32 or 3,000. The German fighters would be at 27 or 8,000 at their top, near their top. And they'd pick them out, and then they'd start diving from 34,000. They'd be up to 350, 400 miles an hour by the time they pulled in behind them, and they just blow them out of the sky and then climb right on back up again and start looking for the next one. It was pretty simple.
This concludes part 1 of this 2-part interview with Brigadier General James K. McLaughlin. Check out part 2 on this Air Combat Journal site after March 5th, 2025. Brigadier General James McLaughlin Sr. passed away on December 16, 2019 in Charleston, West Virginia at the age of 101. His story of bravery and valor lives on here at Air Combat Journal. If you've enjoyed this interview, you might want to check out McLaughlin's autobiography, The Mighty Eighth in World War II, a memoir. And if you like historical fiction, check out my novel, The Ninth Bomber Reunion. It's the fictional tale from a crew from the 490th Bomb Group as they gather for their annual reunion to finally learn the secrets of their final mission. Many of the anecdotes and situations are taken from my over 200 interviews with bomber crew members. You can only get it as an ebook on Amazon Kindle, Search by title or by my name, Jonathan Sermon. If you've enjoyed this oral history, please support this channel by subscribing. Thank you for watching, and as always, I welcome your comments. Godspeed.